Welcome everybody. This is the Zen Peacemakers Circle format, which I know everybody here's familiar with because you've attended many of them. And we really try to move around the circle of our interest in our action in Zen Peacemakers. So these topics could be anything from gender issues to racism to war, peace, and conflict to, as we are focusing on today, the environment, homelessness, food insecurity, and any number of things like this. I'm just really happy. Once again, our good friend, Reverend Fletcher Harper from GreenFaith is our guest today. And I don't remember, it was a year ago, maybe, or so, that we did this once before. So I'm really happy we get to do it again. And Fletcher, I'd love to just at least annualize this, and once a year anyway, have you come in and talk to us about what's going on. Forgive me here. I'm the doorman as well. We've still got some folks coming in. Welcome, folks who have just come in. For those that I've not met, my name's Jeff O'Keefe. I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers, and we are a small but mighty nonprofit working in the engaged social action world, engaged social action based in contemplation. Those are really the only, despite our title, those are really the only qualifiers for anybody to be involved in Zen Peacemakers. We have Christian organizations that are affiliated with us, Jewish organizations. We have Sufis who are part of Zen Peacemakers, and we have people who are completely not related to any lineage or practice whatsoever. So welcome one, welcome all. And a video from Brazil. Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. And I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to mention this because two or more of a group are here on this call today. A number of us are working on a series focused on climate change and the climate crisis and the environment for this spring. And I don't have the dates in my head, but it'll be a 5-part series beginning in March. You'll be able to see the advertisements for this coming up very soon. David Loy is going to join us to do our keynote and kick off the first one. And I believe we're doing them once a week. And a video from Brazil and Kathleen from Germany are part of our planning group, and we'll be doing some of the presentations. So keep an eye out for that. And then finally, I won't be doing my job if I don't mention we are a small nonprofit, and we offer everything we possibly can for free. But that just leaves it to me to ask you, as you are able and as you are called, if you can donate to help support us and these events that we do. Most appreciated. With enough said from me, I'm going to hand the microphone, and I do actually have a literal talking stick. I'm going to hand it over to my friend Fletcher, who I learned this morning is in Copenhagen. So live from Copenhagen, championing world sensibility and peace with the Danish, my friend Fletcher Harper. Fletcher, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's really good to see everybody. And I just got here a couple of hours ago because my daughter is going to begin on Saturday a semester abroad here. She's in university and she's studying here for a semester. And as a loving parent, I couldn't believe it when the incoming US president, whose name I try to avoid saying whenever I can, and started talking about annexing and invading Greenland. I thought, oh my God, I thought Denmark was the safest, friendliest place in the world that my daughter could go study. And now there's this. So I was telling Jeff that I saw that in a wonderfully and typically Scandinavian subtle gesture, the Danish last week released an updated version of their national coat of arms, which included a larger representation of the symbols of Greenland. So at any rate, and I apologize. I've been trying for the last 20 minutes to figure out how to position myself so that the Zoom background is manageable. And this is as best as I can do without absolutely contorting myself. So but it's great to see you all. And there are two things I'd like to put out there at the beginning and ask us to reflect on these, because they're a big part of the context that we're in with this stuff right now. I imagine that most, if not all of us, have seen images from the fires in California. And I find them disturbing and shocking, and they really put a very large crack in my sense of reality. It's one of these things you look at it and say, this is not an action movie. This is actually real life that's happening. And we have a staff person who's been displaced by the fires. My sister-in-law lives about 5 miles away from where the burning is happening. And I've seen photographs that she sent with the sky, this sort of smoky orange color. And so there's the obvious just human compassion and concern that emerges with that. And so there's this one kind of image that is breaking open and breaking apart my sense of normalcy and what makes reality what it is. And then on the other hand, there is the advent of the second Trump administration, and I've come to believe that while I don't know that this is intentional, one of the things that President-elect Trump is incredibly skillful at is trolling everybody to get us thrown off our own centers. He's so good at saying so many things that are outrageous, obnoxious, appalling, ludicrous, insane, utterly simplistic. And I'm sure there are many other adjectives, but I've come to believe that one of the things that's most important about our identity as people from different spiritual and religious backgrounds is, how do we hold on to and find a deeper and new center of being to be grounded in when we're dealing with this? Because this neo-populist phenomenon, nationalist populist phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, is like a wildfire around the world now. And it too, the real wildfires, is, I think, shaking a lot of our senses of what the social contract is, how we all coexist. And I think we've together got a really important role to play with that. What I'd like to do today, just because I think it makes these kinds of exchanges a lot more enjoyable, is to talk for no more than 15 minutes or so and then transition into an extended back and forth. I'm really curious to hear what's on all of your minds about this intersection between our spiritual and religious practice and identity and the climate crisis. I'll share a few things that we're thinking about and planning to do, and really looking forward to that back and forth. Jeff, tell me, I'll now jump into a little bit further into the deep end, if that sounds okay, but anything else to set the table before we go in that direction?
That sounds pretty good. One thing I might hear in the beginning as you're setting up, and perhaps these would be included in your opening words, but describing what your organization is, because I would imagine not everybody knows.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks. GreenFaith is a weird, fun organization that is I used to think that we were in an adolescent stage of development where one arm was growing faster than the other leg, and it wasn't clear how it all held together. And I've come to accept over the years that this is our way of being. We're a grassroots, multi-faith climate justice organization. And what we do with staff now in 12 countries around the world is we raise awareness in diverse religious and spiritual communities about the climate crisis, about the fact that fossil fuels and deforestation are on the physical level what cause it, that greed and indifference on the psycho-spiritual levels are a big part, and disconnection are a big part of what cause it spiritually. And we work to elevate the voices and stories of people from diverse religious and spiritual backgrounds who are suffering from the impacts of climate change, who have a sense of what they think is at stake. We elevate those voices. We try to connect them with a wider range of religious and spiritual people, and we try to bring pressure to bear on political and economic leaders to use the power of moral, ethical, spiritual persuasion to create change. We're an activist group, so we do demonstration type work, but we always try to do that, and I think do in a way that really represents our spiritualities and our religious and faith convictions in public. We don't just want to be another group that's doing important environmental work. We want to be a multi-faith group that's doing that in a really recognizable multi-faith way, because we believe that identity matters. So we've got team members now in 6 countries in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ghana, and Nigeria. We have staff in Brazil and in the US, obviously. We have staff and team members in Germany and in France. And we have staff team members in Indonesia and Japan. So it's a really interesting collection of countries. And we're proud of what we've done. We started 20 plus years ago as a grassroots organization in New Jersey in the United States. Early on, when I would go on speaking engagements around the country and say that I was with an environmental organization in New Jersey, everybody laughed because New Jersey's got a bit of a polluted reputation. But that's where we come from, and we've grown organically over the years, working first in New Jersey, then nationally, and now internationally. And we focus wherever we go on trying to stop new fossil fuel development and related financing, and to try to get new development and financing going in the renewable energy space, and to make sure that's done in an equitable and fair way. So that's who we are. And what that looks like in East Africa, for example, we're working to try to stop a massive pipeline called the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline that is being developed by a French multinational called Total Energy. And to give you a sense and to tell a story that, again, is emblematic of what's happening now in the world. So there's a fairly large oil reserve that is inland in northern Uganda, northwestern Uganda. And Total, the company, wants to extract that oil and wants to pump it through a 1,370 kilometer pipeline to a port in Tanzania, where just about all of the oil would be exported to Europe, where it would be refined and then sold. So there are a couple of things that are complicated and problematic about this project. One is that the oil is very thick and viscous, and the pipeline needs to be heated along the way. That's not normal. And this is one sort of example of why is this kind of project happening now when solar is much cheaper and could be developed at equal scale. And the answer is because there are big oil companies that need to keep on turning the crank, and they do it because that's what they do. And they've got money to essentially influence governments to allow them to do it. And they've got financial backers who are willing to do the same. So the second issue with this pipeline and with this project is, as I mentioned, about 85% of it is scheduled to be sent to Europe. The populations of Uganda and Tanzania, about 30% of Ugandans have regular access to modern forms of energy, about 35% of Tanzanians. So this begs the question, why aren't the corporate and economic powers of the world focused on projects that are going to give Ugandans and Tanzanians access to the kind of energy that they need to have access to greater opportunities for education and healthcare and to develop their livelihoods and jobs? And again, the answer is because the system is not set up that way. The next question that this raises is that the pipeline is slated to go to displace about 80,000 small farmers and their families from their lands. And again, the question is, why is this happening? When you drive through rural Tanzania, rural Uganda, which I've done to visit our GreenFaith circles, and you have lots of television satellite dishes on people's roofs, but you don't yet see solar panels on everybody's roofs. Why aren't, so again, it's a project that's a sad one for a lot of reasons, and it raises a lot of questions. That's an example of the kind of work we do. Similar kinds of work in Indonesia, where the Japanese government is a big supporter still of coal. In the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster in Japan, Japan quickly shut down most of its nuclear plants and made an ill-advised decision to reinvest in coal as a major source of energy for Japan. So Japan has this appetite for coal. Indonesia has a lot of coal. And Japanese companies and banks are major providers and financiers of coal plants and coal operations in a lot of different parts of the world. So we just took about a dozen Japanese religious and spiritual leaders from Japan to meet with a local Muslim organization in Indonesia that's made up of farmers and fisher folk who live very close to a Japan government-funded coal plant. That coal plant has created pollution that has poisoned the water, which has decreased agricultural yields and fishing yields in the area. It has sickened a number of members of the community. The cancer rates have gone up very substantially. And this very courageous local Muslim group has been fighting back. And they have had members who've spent 4 to 6 months in jail because the government doesn't like it when people speak back about these projects and criticize them. And we brought Japanese religious leaders because, understandably, they have very little awareness of the fact that this is happening and that their government is the reason that it's happening. And those Japanese leaders have now gone back and they're educating their communities in Japan about what's happening and that it's wrong and that there's a better way. Japanese culture is very non-confrontational when it comes to social issues, but sadly, because of the history of Japan, the one issue that they're very comfortable and very important spokespersons around is the issue of peace, stemming from the nuclear bombs that the United States detonated at the end of World War II in Japan. And so some of them have started talking about how we need to have peace with the planet. So those are a couple of stories about what we do. And I'd like to return now, before opening this up, to talk about something that we're doing on an international scale and something that we're thinking about doing focused on the US. I know that, thank heavens, not everybody on this call is from the US, but I also know that there are are a number of you who are there who are from the US. And so this is something that we're thinking about. So I'm going to share two things. One is an initiative called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is an effort that started as a utterly crackpot idea by a number of people about 4 years ago, thinking that really, if we're going to deal with the climate crisis, what's needed is we have to stop the expansion of fossil fuels and they have to be phased out. It's a simple truth, and it's a very difficult thing, and it appears in many ways inconceivable, but it has to happen. There's just fossil fuels are responsible for over 75% of greenhouse gas emissions. And while there may in the future be technologies that can capture their emissions, right now those technologies don't exist at any meaningful scale. And it will take at least a decade for them to come online at the scale that's necessary to make a dent in the massive amount of emissions that need to be managed. And so right now, there just has to be the fossil fuel development has to go from being up like this to going down, being phased out. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is this civil society supported initiative now that has succeeded in getting over 100 Nobel laureates, over 50 major cities around the world, including places like London and Calcutta and Los Angeles and Paris, and many others have signed on endorsing this concept. Thousands of scientists, and we've been helping organize religious and spiritual communities and people and leaders to sign on. The Dalai Lama has signed on. The Vatican Dicastery for Integral Human Development, which is the ecology arm of the Catholic Church, has signed on, and so forth. We are preparing a renewed push to get more religious and spiritual people and leaders and institutions to sign on, because this is exactly the way in which the nuclear non-proliferation treaties came into existence. At first, nuclear arms were the normal way of keeping the peace. And then people realized that there was an insanity to this and that there needed to be limits. And so grassroots faith communities, towns, cities started endorsing this concept and built enough power that leaders in the world needed to take it seriously. We have collectively within this movement gotten a dozen countries that are small island states to publicly state their support for this initiative. And we're working with Caribbean faith leaders to try to get a number of Caribbean governments to come on board and do the same. So we're eager to share more information about this and to see if it would be something that we together could help raise our voices about in terms of religious and spiritual leadership around the world. The second initiative that is something that's you focused on President-elect Trump and focused in a very timely way is that we know that one of the things that President Trump plans to do on his first day is to revoke as many of the climate executive orders as he possibly can. And we know that he very likely intends to withdraw the United States for the second time from the Paris Climate Agreement. We don't know the exact timetable about that. We also know that President-elect Trump has made public reference to Christianity in ways that Christians such as myself, and there are many like us, find absolutely gut-wrenching and appalling. And so we are planning within the next day or so to issue a public letter from people of diverse religions and spiritualities calling on President Trump to stay in the Paris Agreement and to leave the environmental regulations and the climate regulations that President Biden put in place. We don't think he'll do that, but we think it's really important to stand up and to speak out. And we're planning to do this in a way that we hope has some humor in a subtle way and the ability to connect with a wider number of people of faith. So some of you may have remembered that President Trump has referred in the past to beautiful Christians that he loves so much. And so we're planning to write the letter and address it. And the first line would be, "Dear President-elect Trump, this is beautiful people of diverse faiths from around the US here." And then then we would say something like, "Have you seen what's happening in California? It's just awful. It makes us feel so terrible." And because of this, we believe in bold action, and we're calling on you to stay in the Paris Agreement and stand up for the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, we don't think that this will change him, but we do think two things. First of all, we believe that it will get some media coverage, and we believe we'll get a meaningful number of religious and spiritual people to sign on. And the second thing is that we think we need to find ways as religious and spiritual people to engage with him, in which we're not just being triggered by his trolling and reacting with rage or exasperation or anger, which at least for me is the first reaction that I have, but that shows that we're grounded in something deeper, and that we've got the flexibility to be able to parry in a spiritual, verbal manner, because we think that matters. In the aftermath of the election, a lot of people feel disempowered. They feel despair. They feel immobilized. They feel resigned. And that's a dangerous, not a good place to be. And so what we're trying to do, one of the things we're trying to do with this letter is to find a way collectively that we can start again to wake up. One of the things that I've always loved the most about Buddhism and the Buddha is Jesus's name in the Christian tradition. Jesus's name means Yeshua means salvation. And I've been taught that the meaning of the word, the Buddha, is that he's the one who woke up. And I'm sure that there are more refined ways to say that, but I've always loved that. And I think that's a big part of what's needed right now. We're caught in the grips of a really awful fever dream, and we need to find ways together to wake up. And we hope that this letter can be a part of that. So as we speak, we're working on some wording with it to try to make it playful and cheeky enough without going overboard, and sincere enough without, so we're working on it, and we'd love to share it with you all. I promised you 15 minutes. I think I've done 20, so I'm going to pipe down now. And I again want to thank Jeff. It's a real pleasure to see you all, and I'm really eager to hear what you're thinking and how you all are doing. And for those of you from outside the US, thank you for tolerating yet another American.
Yeah, we have quite a few people here from not in the US, so it'd be wonderful to hear from others. I see a friend of ours from Bangalore, which is a first, I think. Welcome. Many of you know one another, so hopefully you'll feel comfortable, and we're just sitting around a living room having a conversation. We'll keep this really informal and casual, and I see that people know what to do already. You can use your electronic hand. It's down under React or Reactions. And Reverend, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead and share what's on your mind or in your heart.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. And thank you very much for having this wonderful lecture here. Thank you, Fletcher, for being with us. What I like about what I heard from you is that you are about justice. And I think this is a very important point, because we need to be aware that this country and I'm not American, but I live here. I have lived here. My children live here. My grandchildren live here. We are using most of the energy that, and also Europe, but mostly America, that is produced in the world. And those countries who are producing it do not get it. And I think I've just heard that from you as an example in Indonesia or African countries. And I think it's so important. That is part of the waking up, that we understand that we are actually using other people's oil and coal that they would actually need themselves. If anybody is using it, they should be the ones, right? So I think that the justice part is really important to put out in public. Thank you very much.
Yeah, then two quick thoughts. One is, I think it's extraordinarily important, the point you're making about energy is an incredibly important, good thing. We need it, and a lot of people need a lot more of it. And the good news now is that solar and wind power are not only cost competitive, but they're less expensive. There was an incredible thing that happened. Pakistan had horrible power shortage issues in the aftermath of some floods. And within a 6-month period, because of the price of low cost, good quality Chinese solar panels, the country increased its electricity generation capacity by more than 20%, simply by everyday people going up on their roofs and putting a solar panel up. So the potential is there. California last year had more than 100 days when it produced all of its electricity from renewable sources. So that the transition absolutely can happen. And Reverend, I love the art museum in Milwaukee. It's spectacular.
Thanks, Fletcher. John and Jean, you've got your hand up. And forgive me for referring to both of you, because I imagine one of you has a comment.
It's my First of all, I just also want to say thank you, Fletcher, so much for all the work you're doing and for being a cheerful presence in this. Part of me thinking, how do you do that? How do you stay? You appear to be cheerful. I think it's not an act. But what I wanted to ask, there are people who are proponents, or not proponents, but talking about collapse theory. And that my limited understanding of that is things are going downhill. I think we could all agree with that. And greed seems to be expanding. Aggression and authoritarian rule and all that. I just wonder if you have any comment to the notion that maybe things have to get way worse and so dysfunctional and dysfunctional, just fall apart totally before enough people will wake up and work towards cultivating values of kindness. Yeah.
No, thanks. Hey, Jean, I'm not cheerful all the time. I'm pretty angry a bunch of the time too. So you all bring out the cheerful side in me. So it's one of the reasons we need each other, right? Here's the thing, in the scriptures of my tradition, in the Christian tradition, St. Paul says, just because Jesus' salvation is for real doesn't mean you get to go out and screw around. And I think that there's no question that the world, it seems to me, is in the middle of a negative spiral. that is much bigger than any one country or any one person. And that's for real. And I think that the Dharmic traditions and my understanding of Hinduism in particular is that a big part of that worldview is that there are these massive forces and cycles that play out over the eons, and that is part of the human condition. For me, I think that happens. And I think it's an Irish saying about, is this a private fight or can anybody get involved? I can't stand seeing some of this stuff. And so I think that we need to have be able to hold both things in mind. I think we're at a time now where if we haven't hit rock bottom, I don't know. And I think that I think the world desperately needs the kind of wisdom that our traditions have. I think there's a need and a hunger for the reorientation that they can provide. And I think we need to bring it in a big way, each in our own way. But I also think that we'd be fools not to recognize that there's something really big going on right now.
Thanks, Fletcher. Thank you. And also thank you for the Irish quote. I particularly appreciate it. I just had my DNA done and I'm 95% Irish. I had no idea that it was that much. So I relate to that. Molly Scott, you've got your hand up.
Yes, and I've got the same thing, Jeff. Irish and Scottish, and back to the Bard. And what I want to say, I went to Jean too, and John, that I don't think we can sit around waiting for it to get worse. And what I want to put a word in here for, you just, Fletcher, talked about we each do what we can do. And a quick broad brush about this person as an elder, certified elder person, who is, I'm a psychologist. So I'm a psychologist, but I have a background in the arts. I'm a poet and a singer. And right now, and I was part of that early 60s folk music era, which is now being celebrated. Peter Yarrow just died a couple of days ago. And the film about Dylan is very current here in the US. And I have been part of the current of expression, which has been supportive of political activism. I am a child, not a direct child biologically of Pete Seeger, but very influenced by Seeger and that whole thing. And have written a number of pieces and used to be the front person for Helen Caldecott when she told us the world was going to end. And I was a person who sang and got people to listen. So what I want to say is, thank you so much for what you are doing. And do not neglect, please, any of us, the power of music to open people's minds so that they can hear. To wake up is part of this high frequency energy that music and art can give us. Artists have always been, oh, look at the art, look at the hearts floating up in your schema there. That it's very important to understand that we're dealing neurobiologically, says the psychologist, with brains and minds and hearts and whole bodies that are much more open to receive this information at many levels when music and art are part of it. Artists have always lived at the edge of the world. And I want to say to you, Fletcher, that one of the stories that I have is I used to work a lot in Denmark, and I had a concert there. I was working, I'm a trauma therapist, and I work with people to open up their voices. And I did a concert and I ended with a song I have called We Are All One Planet. And the words go, we're all one planet, and we won't stand by watching her die, hearing her cry and deny that we live as we live. As she lives, we die as she dies. And I die as she dies. And it doesn't resolve at the end. It doesn't go, amen. It doesn't down and finish. And this guy came up to me This is in Copenhagen. He came up to me and he said, Molly, he was an engineer. He said, Molly, why didn't you end that song properly? And I said, because it hasn't ended. It hasn't ended. And we're all a part of it. And I'm so grateful to be part of this organization, all the organizations and the spiritual work that people are doing. Why do we even say spiritual is separate from political? There is not any more these boundaries of separations. And that's what I think we have to wake up to. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Molly. Wonderful, wonderful. I agree. I like that. I agree with you.
Yeah,
Uh,
the thing.
Dee Dee Quigley.
Does that go off? There. Can you hear me
There you-
now?
Yep, you're good now.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Oh my goodness. I agree that art is all and everything. So important. And humor also. It's just a question in my mind is that this is just so rock bottom basic is that so we have such overpopulation. And I lived on a little island for many years named Key West, Florida, and it has taken, in other words, nobody has ever talked about the carrying capacity. And it's gotten denser and denser, and that's just a small picture of what happens everywhere. And I remember seeing David Attenborough, and he said, in his mind, number one is overpopulation in terms of climate crisis, the thing that we must do. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that. And maybe it is because it is so basic. And also, of course, nobody wants to be told what to do, and especially on that level. So I just wonder what anyone might say or might think about that.
And Dee Dee, I appreciate you raising it. It's a tricky one. A couple of quick thoughts on my end. One is that I think that there's a question of number of people, and there's also a question of the average sort of environmental footprint or impact that but a child born in Africa makes an environmental impact through no fault of his or her own that's a tiny fraction of the environmental impact of a child born in the United States, again, through no fault of his or her own. So I think there are those differing geographies that have a lot that need to be considered as part of a conversation about population. I think a second piece, in keeping with something that Reverend mentioned earlier, is there are a lot of people around the world who need to consume more in order to have a basic dignified life, people who are hungry routinely. And so I think that we need to think about those numbers, and we need to think about them in a sophisticated manner that also takes into account basic human needs and the level of impact that population has in different places around the world. But it is an important question.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Dee Dee. Thank you. Priyanka Sharma.
Hi,
Welcome.
this is my
Welcome.
first time here, and I really feel welcomed in this group. Thank you so much for doing this work. And it's 10:30 p.m. at night, so I hope I can express myself clearly. My question was about the importance of actually storytelling, because I was just reading, I was studying the story of the universe by Brian Schwimm and even Tuckley from Yale University, and they were saying that we are stuck in this crisis today because we don't have a story. We were told by scientists that we live in a mechanistic world, and then the spiritual world only focused on salvation, and no one was really thinking about building a beautiful earth here. And I feel like it's impossible to feel divinity or spirituality without nature. And I can see that in India, because we are such a spiritual country, but now it's become just about salvation. It's just become about fake gurus rather than that real spirituality. And Fletcher was wondering if you could use storytelling and the story of the universe, how we came about. Often human beings are blamed that we are a cause for the climate crisis, but in fact we are an important and integral part of the universe. And when we remove all this guilt and shame from the story, I think people will be more open to hear, what you're sharing, the stories of destruction and devastation that you're sharing.
Yep. No, I think there are a couple of stories that are really important that we need, as you said, Priyanka, the story of the evolution of the cosmos and life on Earth as a story that replaces, like you said, the sort of mechanistic understanding and our connection to that evolving story. So I think that's one. I think another story that really has to get wrestled with is the story now that the way that countries at a collective level, as well as individuals, find fulfillment is through mass consumption, as opposed to through work and lives of service and purpose and community. So I think it's really important to think about what are some of these basic stories that we're told that we absorb that get us off course, and what's the real story that we need to help us thrive. So I really like that.
Thank you, Fletcher. And Priyanka, thank you for your question. Wonderful. And I'm so glad you're here. And even though what did you say? It's 10 o'clock at night? 10 o'clock at night tomorrow. I'll wrap my head around that. My friend Ovidio, you've got your hand up. Hi, from Brazil.
Hi, hello. Thanks to the ZP and Fletcher for offering us this space. Like Jeff said, I think this is such an urgent and important crisis that we wanted to devote more time to what's going on. I particularly, who live in South Brazil, this past year, we had the most horrible flood in the city where I live. We stayed a month with 20% of the city underwater. And of course, still less than a year, but away, but a lot of people are homeless, and businesses, small businesses, were not able to return. And, but I want to mention that at least 20% of people were mobilized to help those who were homeless. There was such an amount of solidarity, such an amount that there was a time that people, the politicians were asking people to stay home. You are creating a problem with trying to help so much, but this is human nature. I think in Spain, it happened also that during the crisis, there is a lot of solidarity. You're going to see in Los Angeles now a lot of solidarity. It lasts a week, a month, couple of months, and then people go back to business as usual. So one of our problems is how to raise the consciousness of even more people about the seriousness of what was going on. But really, you have to walk the walk, because I was in the United States when there was the movement, protests against Vietnam. Mass demonstrations are necessary. All the big things that we've accomplished, stop the war, civil rights, rights. Right, and now even in Brazil, we have trouble getting people out in the streets for more democracy. Our democracy is also threatened, like in the States. I don't know if this is a side effect of the digital world. We are able to talk so much virtually that people don't go to the streets anymore as we need. So I think one of the big challenges. And that's a question for you, Fletcher. Ideas of how can we go to the streets and be seen and be heard. In United Kingdom, they have the Silent Rebellion, a group of young people who sit in meditation throughout the weekend. All of us have heard about those more radicals who throw paint at the museums but I think nothing replaces tremendous movements in the streets. So that's one idea. And we are trying to, at the local level, in Brazil, I am involved. There are a lot of small groups who are doing a tremendous, nice job. I'm involved. But another thing I want to say is we got very much discouraged because the mayor last year, who was responsible for a big part of all the bad consequences of the flood, because he did not take good care of a lot of things, maintenance. We had a lot of malfunction in the maintenance of the pumps that were supposed to avoid such a horrible flood. He was reelected. How come this man was reelected? And the idea was that people were, of course, we know that the conservative media here also controls the information, and the mayor was blinded, I think, in a way, from the criticism that he should have received. But one explanation, I am a psychiatrist, so we pay a lot of subjective factors. People were so desperate that they would get even angrier if the mayor, if they would have someone responsible, they would be even more furious. Their inner state would be even worse than just being grieving and depressed about all the loss. And I would say that when among us who are small groups of activists, like mostly everywhere else, I think we do what we have to do. Is it for the planet? Yes, but especially to keep our own mental health afloat. I see for myself, I was able, I cannot, if I don't wash some plastics and throw it in the right place, if I don't separate glass from the other stuff, I feel bad. Good for me. Sometimes I get mad. Oh, well, today I am not feeling like it. But it's good that I have this guilty feeling that I have to do what I know I'm supposed to do. One last thing that I've been hearing from other people, Roshi, Joe Halifax just mentioned this again, and I think it's a very simple idea. You mentioned that Buddha is the awakened. What is supposed to be, in simple words? To be awakened is to know what is the appropriate response to each situation. It seems very vague, but it's also very wise, very simple. The appropriate response to each situation. And right now, the appropriate response to the situation is for us to take better care of our planet. That's the most important thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabio. Thank you. Fletcher, do you have any comment or should
We're for my first question, where in Brazil do you live?
I live in Porto Alegre, South
Oh,
Brazil.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
1.5 million people near the Uruguay and Argentina.
Yep. That's a beautiful place. I've been once.
Good.
I know I just want to say that I agree very strongly about the importance of mass mobilizations. They've been real tipping points. And I'm smiling because there are conversations about the possibility of trying to have a large mobilization this coming September, a mass global climate mobilization. We're involved in those conversations and are strongly supportive of that idea because we believe they're really important. So I hope that there will be a decision that will take place because it matters.
Thanks, Fletcher. Thank you. David, hello. Nice to see you.
Hello, everyone. And Fletcher, thank you so much. It is so important to me to hear the visions and the dreams and the activities of people beside the usual darker activities. So this is very important to hear. I'm really taken with a couple things. What you said, Ovidio, about appropriate response and the idea of stories and music. How do we begin, in a sense, to create new stories about the choices we make as to how we live on a daily basis? And I'm awkward in saying this because I don't mean this in any kind of look at me or what I've done or an egotistical thing, but I worked as a potter. I love working with clay. A few years ago, I realized that the amount of resources, the amount of electricity, the amount of glazing and chemicals involved in all that led me to an extreme decision to give up working in clay. And I was trying to figure out, how can I be what seems to be important, creative, with less of an imprint? And so I've turned to music. Music's been a part of my life all along. And so I was playing flutes in the hospitals for people. And it seemed it was less harmful than working as a potter. I chose not to buy a house or own land in the United States. How can I own land when historically the story is still unfinished about how this land was taken from people? And so I offer these kinds of choices as a bit of, it's so tempting and easy to point to Trump and others and talk about greed. And yet, aren't we all, or many of us, making choices that are still entangled with history and human activity that is filled with greed and filled with unfinished kind of business in relationship to each other, in terms of compassion, in terms of resources, in terms of so many things? And so part of the story building for me is, how can I personally make decisions to begin to create or alter a story of how to live on this earth? And I don't have any answers, but I keep challenging myself before I really can challenge anyone else. These are all questions for me.
Thank you,
Thanks, David, for sharing that. And I think it's a really important point, because each of us has to find our own path and each of us can do more. That's what I try to say to myself, is what is the way that I can do more? And people say, oh, you're doing a lot, but it's that the point is not what are we doing now? It's what is the next step we can take. So thanks for sharing that. And I hope you share that story. It's very effective the way you share it. I hope you share that story widely, the way you present it. At least it landed for me, and I appreciate that.
I do want to point out, let's see. Oh, there you are. Priyanka has put in the chat a link to a course that on the teachings of Thomas Berry that she said was really meaningful. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that. Anyone else have a comment or a question? I have one, Fletcher. When I refer to this, so I want to try to be respectful and not dismissive, but something in the U.S. anyway, and I can't speak for Brazil or Western Europe or India to be sure, but definitely in the U.S. And I don't think it was by accident. I think it's been a campaign for 50 years or so, but something has gone on with the way that otherwise intelligent people process information and make decisions and form their perspectives and opinions about things. And we find ourselves in a situation where people believe that black is white and white is black. And in the face of incontrovertible science and fact, people hold opinions that are contrary and unreasonable. I have to say, unreasonable. And we just had an election where one of the candidates was really talking policy, thought out policy. And it failed because people preferred prevarication. They preferred lies. They preferred emotional posturing and so forth. And my point isn't to try to shame anybody, and I could even be wrong about this. It sure seems like it to me, especially when it comes to climate and issues around the environment and that windmills are killing birds and all this kind of stuff. So my question is, as activists, what do we do with that? It seems like a person by person, house by house, neighborhood by neighborhood challenge. And it doesn't seem like more rational explanation is the key. Because something has changed in the cognitive landscape with so many people. 50 plus years ago, I used to be really good at and spent more than a little bit of time dealing with people who were having negative reactions to hallucinogenic drugs. I won't tell you how I got good at that, but I was good at that. And being able to deal with people. And it's not a rational process. It's not a logical process. You're not going to talk them out of freaking out on LSD. It's got to be some other approach. And that just occurred to me earlier. It almost feels like that's where we are, is that to sit down with a group of people and try to explain to them about climate change and the scientific basis, they just simply dismiss it as being some kind of propaganda. And so I don't know, Fletcher, I'm sure you think about this all day, every day. You encounter it all the time. Do you have any thoughts about what's the key to that door?
I think that relationships are a big piece of the picture. We take broadly a relational organizing approach to our work, because I think that there's oodles and oodles of evidence that shows that it's not information that often information is vitally important, but it's relationships very often that will spur people to take action that they haven't taken before. So I think that's why we the approach we take is starting GreenFaith circles in different parts of the world. We've got about 100 of them now, which are local groups of people of different religious and spiritual backgrounds who are committed to taking action. And it's because they've got relationships with each other, that it's the relationships as well as their commitment to the cause that solidifies it. So I think that engaging with people in conversation about this, finding out what they care about, and building those relationships around this work really matters.
I love that as an approach, and I'm somewhat familiar. We have a GreenFaith Circle here in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm not sure how far outside of the in-groupness of that it reaches in terms of touching the people who really are in denial.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that the goal is to reach people who are in denial or who are opposed to this. I think that what we see when we look around the world is that, at least in terms of the religious population, around the world, somewhere between 25 and 35% of the religious and spiritual population seems to us to fall into a sort of fundamentalist, highly traditionalist, quite conservative sort of way of seeing things. And that sort of is part of this global constellation that is so problematic that we're talking about. There's about 10 to 15% of the religious world falls into the religious or spiritual progressive kind of community. And that's groups like Zen Peacemakers and others. And then there's an awful lot of people who are the sort of moderate, in the middle, not activated. So that's where we focus, is how do you get more people like that out of the pews, up from the prayer rugs and meditation cushions, and into action? So I think I don't think that the aim should be to try to convert those who are deeply opposed to what we're talking about, because I think that can happen, but it's a very lengthy and uncertain kind of process. And I think that, at least from our perspective, let's keep the folks who really care activated, and then let's find ways to bring folks who are ready and able to be moved. Let's move them.
I think there's something to that, and I don't want to get too far afield here, but just to underscore your point about that big middle, we hear in the U.S. again, and forgive me for having this be too U.S. focused, but we hear people refer to the country being divided 50-50 after the election. No, about 75 million people voted for Kamala Harris, about 77 million people voted for Trump, about 93 million people who were eligible to vote did not bother to do so. More people didn't vote than voted for either candidate. It really points to that middle demographic. With respect to David and Ovidio, I'm going to call on Kathleen because she's speaking for the first time, and then David and Ovidio, I'll come back to you.
Oh yeah, thank you, David and Ovidio, for allowing me to pass by you and your risen hands. I'm not really sure what I actually want to say, but I'm moved and I'm with you. And maybe I begin with the last resonance that rose, and that is what I experience here in Germany. I can't say so much about Europe as a whole, but here in Germany is that seeing that governments and institutions become more and more dysfunctional, as Jean said before, and as maybe we have a broken government here, and we have new elections in February. It seems to me that the civic society is looking for more kind of meta cooperation, so that it seemed to be a subtle problem. What also seems to me right now that we have a lot of organizations who are working in the field, but also are concurring or there's kind of difficulty to get the attention that is needed. Because this group has a wonderful idea, and that group has a great idea, and that group has a fantastic idea, and they all want your attention and your action. And so to coming together on a meta level, to building bigger organizations to bring people together and at the same time work on the local level. And when I heard your introduction, Fletcher, to GreenFaith again in the beginning, and know a bit about the ZPI organization, so in which way are we going to work together in the future, more than once a year a nice lecture by Fletcher in this place? So this is what I wonder, or signing a letter that either of our organizations develop or design. So this is one of my questions: how can we work together on a bigger scale and staying local at the same time? And another resonance maybe is what you said in the very, very beginning, Fletcher, about being decentered by what politicians or the president-elect, how they talk and how they speak, and that they bring us out of balance. And what came to my mind in that moment was that one of my basic trainings at the moment is decentering, because of what Vanessa Machado de Oliveira says in her Hospicing Modernity book. So how can we actually bring our ego out of the center of our life, and see ourselves as a piece of nature, as a part of nature? And that actually helps me. That training of in decentering helps me not being decentered by hate speech or something. So there's no Angriffsfläche, I don't know the English word, there's no space that can get me there, because I'm on the way anyway. And to get rid of the ego, so it can't be disbalanced. That's one small thing. And I would love to share a bit about what what we are doing here in Germany, but I think that takes too much time now. The one thing is that we did have up to a couple of weeks ago, we did have a Green Party Minister of Economics, a philosopher, a writer of children's books, Robert Habeck, and I am looking for possibilities, and we're organizing on that to keep him in the political field, because that was really a chance and a wonderful thing to have him 3 years in that Ministry of Economics. He did so much for renewable energies and everything, and it was really a pleasure. And he is running for a chancellorship anyway, even though he's totally being bashed completely by everyone else. So that's a hope that we keep up here. Thank you for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Fletcher, before I move on, any response, or should we go to the next one?
Just that I'd love to explore further ways we could collaborate. Maybe that's a possible follow-up from this.
To that end, Fletcher, perhaps in the chat, if you would like to put your contact and also the website for GreenFaith, so people know how to get in touch, that would be great. David, do you want to go? I think you were up first.
Thank you. Again, Fletcher, you're bringing up the idea of relationships, and as I'm listening to people, I'm thinking, I'm sure this is already occurring, but how can we develop more grassroots supportive groups to change the stories of how we live or how we think we need to live? And again, I apologize in a sense that I'm using myself as an example, but before COVID, I played for 6 years. I brought flutes into the hospitals. It was an incredible opportunity. It was just amazing to be able to do that. Then COVID came along, and it was like, how do I continue this that I love to do? And even though I was so resistant to technology, I decided I was able to get a grant to buy a computer, a microphone, and I turned my living room into a recording studio, and I Zoom into children's hospitals around the country, playing music for children. Music for me is, I've unplugged in a sense from the whole thing of politics. It's a language I don't want to speak anymore. I want to speak a language that goes deeper or touches something other than, and this is just a personal choice, but I see it's like and through this avenue with music, I'm now able to send little music videos to a very small school in Kenya, very poor school. They don't have a computer, they don't have Wi-Fi, but I can send by WhatsApp these little videos of flute music to the children. And I'm looking for more and more ways to explore this way of singing to the world, essentially, or bringing what I love to the world. That it's what I love, and it's all that I can offer, in a sense.
That's great. What comes up for me is, how do we amplify that, David? Because I think because I think also the intentionality behind this stuff matters a lot too, right? I mean, we can all feel it when you're saying this. And that matters. That's what changes people. It's that kind of realness.
Thanks again, David. You might just be able to get the last word here.
Okay, so I'll try to be very brief, but I was mobilized by this idea that Kathleen also presented, that we need to have broad coalitions. For example, the rest of the world, different from the United States, the political situation is of many parties. And I just wanted to say that the conservative mayor that won here, he only won because the center left went divided to the elections. I've been a social activist since my teens, and so I know a lot of the politicians, and I was trying very much with a big group here. Let's go united. We can beat the mayor if we go united. But politicians, even left politicians, have very big egos. And so we need to try to change that. We have to also work. We were talking about, yes, mass mobilization is very important, but to work with the top is also very important. And I am right now working with young people, which gives me more life energy, which is very important. And just to finish, I read about a year ago a very important study that young people are very convinced and aware and worried about the planet. They are. But if they don't vote, people feel discouraged, disempowered. This in the United States, the people very clearly don't vote because they feel they're not going to make any difference. So we have to try everything. We have to try to work at all those different levels. And also the climate problem is, we say climate as a word, the pollution of the oceans, the pesticides in the land. You see, the ecological problem is a better word than just the climate, because the problem is broader. And I think it's not surprising that we have to work at all levels possible. And each one of us, even we have to work inside of us a lot. So I think there's a lot to do. We are here because I'm quite sure that if we leave this meeting with a little bit more energy to do a little bit more, that's great. And I think we can accomplish this.
Very inspiring. Thank you, Ovidio. Thank you. Thank you. Fletcher, we just have a few minutes left. Would you like to close us out with remaining thoughts? And we, in Zen Peacemakers, we're based on what we refer to as the three tenets. That is, a mind of not knowing, bearing witness to what is without turning away, and then taking action. And more and more, we're really trying to focus our programs like this and our thinking and whatnot on that last bit, on the taking action. If you can leave us with any recommendations for things that what are we down to? The 18 of us can do, that might be nice. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, everybody, for your comments.
In the spirit of crowdsourcing, I'm going to put in the chat right now the draft of that letter to President Trump. I would love any kind of comments that folks have. We've had a couple of groups look at it and make recommendations. So please, if you're into Google Documents, jump in and add thoughts about words you like, words you don't, phrase, that sort of thing. But you'll see we're trying to frame it in a way that sort of uses his vocabulary, but doesn't, and remains, and takes his style of talking and subverts it. So see what you think. I'd love so that's one thing. Once we get this ready to roll, we'd love to have we're thinking of doing some hashtags like hashtag beautiful Christians for the climate. And we'd love to have hashtag beautiful Buddhists for the environment. And just again, to put a playfulness into it. And then I think the other piece is I'd love, Jeff, we would enjoy the chance to think together about how might we do a little bit more stuff together. And I think final thing is we see the fastest growing part of the religious spiritual world globally is the spiritual but not religious. And of all of the long-standing religious and spiritual traditions, to me, it's not even close that Buddhism offers a language that is accessible and inviting to that community. So I think the language that you all are in part custodians and followers and practitioners of really matters. And thanks for that. And it's been a real pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for being with us for this hour and a half.